Arab millionaire faked a coma. But the nurse's shocking confession changed everything. The hospital room was eerily quiet except for the constant beeping of monitors and the faint hiss of oxygen from the machine beside the bed. An Arab millionaire lay in the center, motionless, with his eyes closed and his chest rising and falling in a slow, controlled rhythm. To everyone around him, nurses, doctors, and visiting relatives, he appeared to be in a deep, unresponsive coma, a man caught between life and death, fragile and helpless. Little did they know, he was fully awake, every sense alert, every word carefully noted, every expression memorized. The billionaire had chosen this path deliberately, crafting an elaborate act of unconsciousness to test the true nature of those who surrounded him. It was not just about protecting his wealth or business empire. He wanted to expose hidden motives, uncover lies, and understand who would betray him when he seemed powerless. Days passed, and the hospital staff continued their routine, moving about the room with mechanical precision, discussing his medical condition, debating his prognosis, and quietly speculating on how his fortune might be divided. Relatives would come in, some clutching tissues and pretending to cry, others wearing forced smiles while their eyes darted to the bedside, silently calculating inheritance and advantage. Every conversation, every slip of truth, was absorbed by the man in the bed, and he began to see the world as it truly was, stripped of pretense and loyalty. Among the staff, one nurse stood out, carrying herself with unusual anxiety, constantly glancing over her shoulder and whispering to herself. When she thought no one could hear, she was carrying a secret, a burden heavy enough to weigh on her conscience, and it was only a matter of time before it slipped. One quiet evening, as the ward settled into an uneasy calm, she leaned over the bed and began to speak, believing she was alone in confessing her guilt. Her voice trembled as she admitted to being part of a scheme orchestrated by some of the millionaire's business partners, a plan designed to manipulate his health records, control his finances, and ensure that he would never fully recover, leaving them free to claim his empire. Tears ran down her face as she revealed how she had been forced to stay silent, fearing the repercussions of exposing the plot, yet unable to bear the weight of complicity any longer. The billionaire listened without a sound, his mind cataloging every word, every name, and every deceitful act, knowing that this confession was far more valuable than any legal document. The very next morning, he opened his eyes, slowly at first, then fully, startling the hospital staff and his relatives alike. Gasps filled the room as he sat upright, the air thick with tension, and demanded immediate legal counsel. The nurse, pale and shaken, realized the enormity of what had occurred, understanding that her words had reached the one person who could use them to reveal the truth. Within days, corrupt partners were exposed, plots unraveled, and justice delivered, proving that the millionaire's calculated deception and the nurse's long-held confession had together changed everything, exposing greed, betrayal, and hidden truths that no one had imagined would ever come to light. Day after day, the Arab millionaire remained motionless in his hospital bed, his eyes closed, his body seemingly unresponsive, while the world around him continued unaware that he was fully conscious, observing and absorbing every detail. Relatives visited in waves, entering quietly, sometimes whispering among themselves, sometimes pausing to touch his hand or stroke his hair, performing the rituals of concern, while their true intentions lurked just beneath the surface. Some shed tears that were not born of sorrow but of anticipation, calculating the inheritance they believed they would soon receive, while others murmured in corners, quietly plotting how to maneuver themselves into advantageous positions, discussing assets, investments, and the division of his vast fortune as if he were already gone. Every gesture, every glance, every hushed conversation revealed more about human nature than he could have imagined, exposing the greed, impatience, and opportunism of those he had once trusted. Yet it was not only the family that drew his scrutiny. The nurse assigned to his care appeared unusually tense, her posture stiff, her movements cautious, and her eyes constantly flicking toward doors or other staff members before she spoke, as if she carried secrets too dangerous to share openly. She moved with deliberate care, adjusting his pillows, checking his vitals, and administering medications, all while mumbling occasional observations to herself or quietly speaking to other staff, never realizing that the man she believed to be unconscious was listening to everything. He noted the subtle inflections in her voice, the brief pauses before certain names were mentioned, the fear underlying her careful words, and the way she sometimes bit her lip, betraying guilt and worry. Over time, he realized that she was carrying a burden, a heavy secret that had been forced upon her, something she had been desperate to reveal but feared the consequences. She spoke in whispers, thinking her audience was limited to the walls of the room and the indifferent machines that monitored his supposed condition. But in reality, every confession, every hesitant word, was captured by him with meticulous attention. The realization of her fear and her hidden honesty fascinated him. He understood that her courage, though restrained, would become crucial in the unfolding of events he had orchestrated. As the days went by, the combination of the family's veiled ambitions and the nurse's silent struggles created a tension in the room so thick it seemed almost tangible, as if the very air had become charged with secrets waiting to be unveiled. He lay there, outwardly passive, while inwardly he processed every detail, every lie, every truth, knowing that this period of observation was revealing the character of those around him, exposing both loyalty and betrayal, and preparing the ground for the shocking revelation that would change everything once he chose to act. One night, as the hospital ward fell into an unusual quiet, the dim lights casting long shadows across the floor, the nurse finally sat beside the millionaire's bed, her hands trembling slightly as if she could no longer hold the weight of her secret. Believing that the man lying motionless before her was incapable of hearing, she leaned closer and began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. She confessed that she had been forced into silence, trapped in a situation that had left her terrified for her own safety, caught in a web of manipulation and deceit that stretched far beyond the hospital walls. Her words revealed a carefully concealed plot orchestrated by his own business partners, people she had once trusted but who had turned ruthless, scheming not only to seize control of his empire but to ensure he never fully recovered, effectively eliminating him from the equation. She described in hushed tones how these partners had bribed staff, tampered with medical records, and even interfered with his treatment, creating delays, falsifying progress reports, and manipulating medications to suit their plan. The nurse spoke of her constant anxiety, the sleepless nights spent thinking about the consequences if anyone discovered her knowledge, and the moral torment of carrying a secret that weighed more heavily with each passing day. Tears began to stream down her face as she admitted her guilt, confessing that she had remained silent out of fear, but that the burden had become unbearable. She begged silently for forgiveness, her words directed at the very man she believed was unconscious, never imagining that he could hear every syllable, every emotion, every trembling plea. She described how she had watched the conspirators maneuver in the background, how she had seen falsified documents exchanged, how she had observed subtle manipulations that were almost invisible to anyone not paying close attention, and how she had been forced into complicity despite her better judgment. She detailed the constant fear that someone would discover her knowledge and punish her, the careful steps she took to avoid suspicion, and the agonizing moments when she questioned whether remaining silent was a crime worse than any potential exposure. Every confession poured out of her with urgency, an emotional release of guilt and fear, as if speaking aloud might somehow absolve her, though she had no idea the man she addressed was listening to everything, absorbing the full extent of the betrayal and the danger that had surrounded him. In that quiet hospital room, the nurse's confession became a pivotal turning point, revealing not only the malicious intentions of those who plotted against him, but also the courage and honesty of someone who, despite fear and coercion, had, finally, spoken the truth. The billionaire, lying silently, processed every word, every detail, understanding that this confession was more valuable than any document, more powerful than any legal maneuver, and that the information she had just revealed could change the course of his empire and expose the hidden treachery of those who believed they could act with impunity. The following morning, the hospital room was filled with a tension that no one could name, as if the very air sensed that something extraordinary was about to happen. The Arab millionaire, who had spent days appearing unconscious, suddenly opened. His eyes, slow at first, as though testing the world to see if it had noticed his return, and then fully, sharply, with a gaze that cut through the confusion like a blade. Gasps erupted from the nurses, doctors, and relatives, some clutching their chests, others stepping back in disbelief, unable to comprehend that the man they had written off as incapacitated was fully awake and alert. The relatives, who had come in expecting to witness a passive recovery or to finalize their schemes in whispers, froze mid-step, their carefully constructed masks of concern cracking to reveal fleeting flashes of fear, guilt, and surprise. Every calculated smile, every feigned tear, every whispered plot that had been discussed in his presence while he slept was now exposed in his mind, catalogued with precision, and ready to be used to his advantage. He sat up slowly, letting the world adjust to his sudden return, and his sharp eyes fell on the nurse who had confessed her secret the night before, her face pale, her hands trembling, her entire body radiating the realization that her words had reached the man they concerned. Yet instead of anger, he extended a rare form of understanding and offered her protection, acknowledging her courage and the fact that her confession had revealed more than just the scheme. It had provided him with the leverage to act decisively against those who had plotted his downfall. Within hours, he summoned his legal counsel and began orchestrating a response so precise that it left his business partners scrambling, their manipulations, bribes, and treachery unraveling under the weight of evidence that he had silently gathered, while feigning helplessness. Documents were reviewed, testimonies recalled, and inconsistencies in their stories brought to light, exposing the full depth of betrayal that had surrounded him, while the nurse stood quietly nearby, witnessing the results of her honesty in a way she had never imagined possible. The millionaire's staged coma had not only revealed the greed, deceit, and ambition of those around him, but it had also demonstrated the power of patience, observation, and timing, turning what appeared to be vulnerability into an unassailable advantage. In the days that followed, corrupt partners were removed, plots foiled, and justice served, with the entire operation hinging on the critical confession of someone who had been too afraid to speak until the right moment. The once hidden truths, the silent betrayals, and the covert schemes were brought to light, transforming a room of deceit into a scene of reckoning, and proving that the combination of strategic planning, sharp intellect, and the courage to reveal the truth could change the course of events entirely. What had begun as a carefully crafted deception ended with a triumph that left everyone involved stunned, humiliated, or awed, and the Arab millionaire emerged not merely as a survivor, but as a master of a game that none of his adversaries had ever seen coming, with the nurse's confession as the fulcrum that shifted everything in his favor and changed the trajectory of his life forever.